Kate LaFalcha. Welcome back to Irish Granny Tarot. We are proceeding with our Saturday book from last week. Just did video number 3. This is Glimpses of Other Realities, Volume 2, High Strangeness by Moulton, Howe. And this is video number 4. So, when last we left, our author was speaking at a truck stop with a guy telling her a story of a alien encounter in an airplane, a military airplane. So he said, on this plane, this is a secret cryptography plane from the military. On the plane, he said he was aware of physical reality inside, but not outside. He said that the fact that there was nothing out there but sky, no landmarks, no horizon, no clouds, he said that he was aware that they were outside of physical reality, outside the plane. And then he found he wasn't on the plane at all. He said, I think I was always in the plane in the physical sense, but that my soul was no longer there. First, he felt extreme panic, and then he felt serenity out of the plane. He felt fine. This is sounding more like a near-death experience every moment. Then he said that he encountered 3 grays that looked like Whitley Strieber's grays in communion. And he said he felt like he was standing, but there was no ground underneath him. And he said he could feel the gravity, and it was unnerving because he was somewhere up in the air. He said the grays were nothing. They were just light gray skin. They had big black eyes that were pointed at the ends like elongated footballs, and it was like looking at a vegetable, he said. They smelled vegetative. They seemed without emotion. They led him where to go telepathically, like a conversation, but without speaking. They did squeaky little talking sounds to each other. He said it was like a bamboo forest. If you've ever been in a bamboo forest, the bamboo rubs together. It was that kind of a sound. Clicks like punctuation. He said the government programming makes him vomit. It wasn't the ETs that did that to him. He said a memory is like an electrochemical pulse in your head. And in order to stop your memory, they had to short circuit that pulse. And they can do this with either a chemical thing with a drink or an IV. And it does something to enzymes that trigger the electromagnetic reactions of the pulse, and then they short circuit your memory. He said with the grays, you don't move, you just vibrate to the right frequency and you're there. They don't cross distances to get from point A to point B. They just think about point B, and then there they are. They frequency. The grays, he says, are a conduit of someone else's energy through them to achieve what the person wants. So let's wrap your head around that. So unless the individual involved becomes conscious, and then they can stop it. They wouldn't say who the someone was that the energy came from for the grays to channel. So this is all just a little vague. If you feel like it's vague, it is vague. He said he was taken by the aliens to an Atlantean time frame, to a trireme. A trireme is a longboat, like a crew shell, and it's rowed by 3 levels of rowers. And he said they tried to use that as an explanation of how they got from point A to point B. And he said that he was told that in the past he was actually a captain of one of these triremes, and he screwed up in that life, and he was supposed to help people to escape Egypt and hide in their boats, but in his boat, but he didn't. They didn't have the money that he wanted, the bribe that he wanted, so he wouldn't do it. And that was a big mess up in his karmic thing. Now they're talking to him about karma and spiritual stuff. This is very interesting, and therefore reincarnation, that he's here making up for that. And he's driving a semi, and there's a relationship there. So they all died. And then the flowers that he saw, he reports that again. And then he talks about this Sir Percival guy. He said he looked like an armor, like a crusader in armor. And he was told by this guy. This guy kind of represented, the quests, the missions that these knights went on. And he told him that his choices were free will choices. And if people died, it was because of his free will choices, and that there are consequences for that. This is aliens telling him this, we think. We're not even sure. And he said the issue of free will is at the root of mankind's chronic moral dilemmas on this planet. The medieval philosopher Maimonides, schooled in the mysticism of the Hebraic Kabbalah, put it this way, and I will read from Maimonides. Every man is granted free will. If he desire to incline towards the good way and be righteous, he has the power to do so. And I'm assuming she also, if he desire to incline towards the unrighteous way and be a wicked man, he also has the power to do so. Give no room in your minds to that which is asserted by heathen fools, and also by many of the ignorant, among even the Israelites themselves, namely that the Holy One, blessed be he, decrees that a man from his birth should be either a righteous man or a wicked man. In other words, you're not born good or evil. You choose good or evil. Since the power of doing good or evil is in our own hands, and since all the wicked deeds which we have been committed with our full consciousness, it befits us to turn in penitence and to forsake our evil deeds, the power of doing so being still in our hands. And the Buddhists would add that the unpleasantness of having to face the same choices until one gets it right is what the cycle of reincarnation is all about. This third dimensional plane is where a soul can work out karma, the sum and consequence of persons' actions during successive phases of existence. And in order to do that, we have to cope with the seductions of the physical senses, the 7 deadly sins. Some of my very favorite sins: pride, avarice, lechery, anger, gluttony, one of the best, envy, and sloth. The challenge is to control the senses to keep from destroying our souls. This is what the alien told him. And he was told that it's good to know what you got wrong last time, and it's really bad to have to relive it. And he's told it was a great opportunity to witness past errors. That's why he was being given this opportunity to learn from it, not to make the same mistake again in this life. He says, but you can't be sure what the mistake really was. This is the issue. You might consciously not be able to figure it out, but has your soul learned enough to instinctively make a different choice this time around? He was told, when you have learned the right thing, then you can pick the flowers when you've earned it. So then suddenly finds himself back on the plane. 2 engines are on fire and everything else is back to the normal outside. And they limped back to the base. They were escorted off the plane, and he can't remember by who, and he can't remember what else happened. He can't communicate with living crew members yet anymore. It's too dangerous still. So he says that what he learned was all dimensions, planes, and worlds are interconnected. We humans on this earth are messing with that balance, and we can't be stopped completely because we have free will. Several people did communicate with me in the past week since we did the other videos of this book and said, well, why don't the aliens just step in and stop all of this? They can't interfere with our free will. It's up to us to make the right decisions. And unfortunately, everybody has to make the right decisions. A fallen angel is someone who opted for power instead of truth, he was told, and then loses the ability to tell right from wrong. He said Lucifer was just an entity that got into a power play with the Supreme Being. And Howe doesn't understand what happened, but makes references to new studies in physics. And I would recommend that you read The New Science of Heaven by Temple, because that's really the cutting edge. What she's talking about is true to a point, but we now even know more. And then there is a whole couple of pages here on okay, here I will read you this. This is what he said. This is by a guy, Jankowicz, who had a near-death experience. One of the greatest discoveries I made during death was the oscillation principle. Since that time, God represents for me a source of primal energy, inexhaustible and timeless, continually radiating energy, absorbing energy, and constantly pulsating. Different worlds are formed from different oscillations. The frequencies determine the differences. Therefore, it is possible for different worlds to exist simultaneously in the same place, since the oscillations that do not correspond with each other also do not influence themselves. Thus, birth and death can be understood as events in which, from one oscillation frequency, and therefore from one world, we come into another. Frequently, the subject of other dimensional realities comes up in discussions or correspondences with people who claim to be government insiders privy to the deepest secrets about the UFO phenomenon. Those insiders ascribe motives to other dimensional beings which imply that not all is benign and that an ancient struggle between opposites might be still around us. Okay, so this is one view from alleged government insiders from 1994. She got a call, Howe did, from a guy called Ray Boca or Bosch, I'm not sure, a researcher into heaven, hell, judgment, death, the end of the world, a couple of light topics. And he said he was contacted by two guys from the Department of Defense about his research about life, death, heaven, hell. This from the Department of Defense. They wanted to know about his research and wanted to read Glimpses of Other Realities, Part 1. And she told him, okay, I will give you the book and have them make corrections, mark truth and untruth, what we got right and what we got wrong in the margins. Would be a great way to communicate with us, and it would really help Howe's research. Later, he came back and he actually mailed her a floppy disk with the agent's response to her request about marginal comments. And this is what these government agents from the Department of Defense told her. Her book, Glimpses of Other Realities, is right on. And Bosch, the guy that talked to her, his book about his concepts of life, death, heaven, hell, etc., is right on. Their program, whatever that is trying to exploit those ideas. ETs contact us in the way that Bosch speculates, and they have and will continue to do so. The program directors think that they can learn enough to control the ETs, whatever this program of the government. I mean, these guys are obviously stepping outside the bounds of that program to speak with Howe and Bosch and telling them you're on the right track, you've got things right. The government is aware of all this, but the government is hoping to be able to control the ETs, and the opposite is true. It's not possible. The ETs are controlling us. And they told her that the true purpose of all of this is manipulation and deception. The bizarre phenomena are meant to be a distraction from the fact that we're being manipulated. Crop circles create cellular changes in the plants, and the same energy that's done on those crop circle plants is done in negative healing experiments. Don't ask. They don't tell. Animal mutilations with UFO sightings and helicopter sightings on them and occupant sightings are a smokescreen, she was told. They're meant to confuse you. People are now busy chasing secret government programs, satanic cults, and UFOs, while the actual perpetrating agents go unsuspected. So, who are they? Let's see, where am I here? The helicopters are smokescreens or part of the program. They're checking on sites and so-called abduction victims. There are many variations of the real answer deliberately spread around, and many feel that they have an understanding of the truth. So depending on who you're talking to, depending on what they've read, depending on what they may have researched or experienced themselves and been told, they think they have the answer. And there are all sorts of people running around feeling they have the answer. So it behooves us to take what we hear with a grain of salt, to be cautious about what we hear. I'm not going to tell you I have an answer. And Howe is a scientist and a journalist. She's an investigative journalist in science. She's not going to tell you she knows exactly what's going on. You'll see. We'll get to that point. Eventually, they told her, look, the public couldn't handle the truth if we told them the truth. This is an ultimate diversion and abduction, and they really do happen. They really are ETs, but really it's about distraction from the real source of aliens. Oh, and the true source of ET and UFO abductions are not extraterrestrial. But there are many, and this is being manipulated, and it's strange, and the phenomenon will increase. Now, this, of course, increased to a point and now has decreased. Let's go back to the true source not being extraterrestrial. So what are we supposed to think about that? I would guess it's interdimensional or time travel. I think it's got more to do with the notion of spiritual evolution. People just are not ready to hear this kind of thing. Most Western cultured Christians can't even cope with the notion of reincarnation at its most basic. So he probably has a point. People probably could not wrap their heads around this. And we actually don't have the brain power to fully comprehend it anyway. So Roswell, that happened in 1947, he said it's true. It happened. Bodies were gotten. Ships were gotten. Technology was gotten. Bob Lazar, his story about Area 51 and the government having UFOs and trying to back engineer propulsion systems, true. But the origin is not extraterrestrial, once again. And in the margin here with this next part, I wrote, wow. So Howe notes that time travelers from our future or beings from other dimensions are not extraterrestrial, or non-biological entities from other solar systems are not necessarily extraterrestrial. She's told that the beings the program is dealing with are not benevolent, and I wrote, oh, and not neutral. I wrote, oh. And they're dealing with us with mind control weapons. Okay. So very few could understand any of this or accept it gracefully. So they feel that Howe, her comments in Glimpses, book 1, about ancient civilizations and aliens need to be considered in the light of the bigger picture here of the deception of mankind as a whole. So this makes sense to analyze false gods of ancient civilizations in light of the current level of deception. And then I wrote, oh, this is only logical, that these beings would see that the foundational base could be twisted and distorted to seem like they were bringing all of the good things to humanity. We're told to look at Jacques Vallée's Passport to Magonia, which we've covered, and make parallels between fairy manifestations and current events like ETs, and also messengers of deception. Vallée is so close to the truth there, except the ultimate manipulators are not human. And I have ordered messengers of deception, and I'll quickly look at it and see if it's going to be appropriate for this format. His Passport to Magonia was really interesting. If you haven't read it, if you haven't looked at the video, he talks about different levels of spirit entities, which is actually part of Hermetic philosophy. Different planes of every dimension, and certain sorts of evolutionary spiritual entities that are not quite on the par with humans, but they're getting there. And they live in nature, they live in the woods, they live in plants, and they live in animals, and they live in the air, and they have interacted with people forever. And depending on our level of sophistication and our cultural context, we see fairies or gnomes or leprechauns or sprites, etc., etc., etc. So they told her that she'd done good work, but for them, they can't get into it. They're not allowed to discuss a lot of it. And what they said is, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. Vallée has always said that these are not visitations from outer space, that they are a control system. So Howe had one more communication with these agents from the Department of Defense who praised her book. And she sent photos of a baby hybrid. They replied that it was too dangerous for us to communicate now. So there's a guy called David Bohm, B-O-H-M. And okay. She read his book, Wholeness and the Implicate Order. He's now deceased, professor of theoretical physics at Birkbeck College in London. In his book, discussed a cosmology of multidimensional frequencies that resonate with each other, and in which any element from a photon and an atom to a star or a human being has enfolded within itself the totality of the universe. In this reality model, matter and conscience are one, and time is an illusion. He says about the theory of relativity, physical time is in fact relative in the sense that it may vary according to the speed of the observer. The quantum theory implies that elements are separated in space are generally non-causally and non-locally related projections of a higher dimensional reality. Therefore, one must go on to consider time as a projection of multidimensional reality into a sequence of moments. Time as a projection of multidimensional reality might also mean it can be traveled, captured, manipulated, and played back in ways still incomprehensible to human science. But I would once again refer you to the videos that we made on the book Hermetic Philosophies, because this sounds very similar, and we're talking physics. So this is another story from an alleged government insider, 1985. She gets approached by two guys, quite a bit actually. Well, she's put herself out there. So she's approached by two guys who said that they'd been in MJ-12, they'd been agents, they had knowledge of the Greys, and that we should not trust them. They were ETs that had made biological androids that were insect-like or humanoid, that there was a variety, and each type was created for particular tasks. So when you hear these different stories of different ET experiences, they're experiencing different ET entities. MJ-12 was created by Truman to look into UFOs and to do retrievals and back engineer technology and study the beings and to keep the public ignorant, to avoid panic, and to control the alien technology for the benefit of the United States. So this guy said he had held an alien communicator. It was a flat plastic thing called a yellow book, because when it lit up, it had yellow lights. Now, I thought this was really interesting. I even wrote this in the margin. This vaguely reminds me of an iPad or a Kindle. And remember, this was written, this is in 1985 that this was a particular story, and there were no ebooks. So she was told, this guy said that the text scrolled as your eyes followed it, and you were able to read it. It just continued. As you read it, it moved as you consumed the information. And if you turned it over, there were 3D holographic photos that pop up into the air. So if you could turn it over, it would, like Star Trek, there'd be these pictures in the air. He said the ETs, they know how to capture time and play it back in 3D images. They're manually explaining how to work it, and in this book, tablet thing, that the yellow book that he was looking at, he was shown the history of the earth, and he was told that Jesus was sent here by the ETs to teach love and nonviolence. He didn't know how it appeared to people who looked at it from different languages, because anyone could read it. So he didn't understand how it was one language. If you spoke English, it looked like English. If you spoke French, it looked like French, etc. So the holographic pictures that pop out of the back change as you move the book. And the pictures are not related to the text on the other side. He didn't hear any, his name was Sherman, he didn't hear any sounds giving him directions. He said he saw the ascension of Christ into an auroral light. He saw pillars coming out of the ground and buildings forming. He saw UFOs. April of 1964, the incident at Socorro was a scheduled directional error. So they came for a scheduled meeting with the American military, the UFOs did, and there was some sort of a misunderstanding, and they came back the next day to White Sands. And Zamora, the Lonnie Zamora, who was the cop who witnessed the whole thing and drew it, she's told that he drew it perfectly. So 1964, the meeting was the Type 1 ETs, and it was supposed to be for, they had wands for translating with them at this meeting, and they looked like the ETs that showed up at the Roswell crash. One, though, was taller, and he had a big nose, and he kind of looked strange. And he had sort of like Egyptian, well, of course it looked strange, but he had on this weird Egyptian kind of armor, and he sort of hung back and didn't interact. It was like a supervisor. The ETs had been, they were told, with Sumerians, with the Egyptians, with the Mayans. It's not clear, did they live with them or visit them or create them, but there was, let's just say, interaction. In fact, it's interesting, Linda says, that Mayan and Mongolian babies are sometimes born with odd blue marks on the lower spine. And it's because ETs experimented genetically in Bhutan, Tibet, Nepal, and then also in areas of Central America. And that, there's actually some truth to this, because I once babysat the friend of one of my daughters for a long time, school year. And this little girl was from Korea. And I was told by the social workers, by her parents who adopted her, just be really aware that if there's some reason to take her to the hospital, if she has, falls down and needs stitches, and you have permission to take her to the hospital, there is the possibility that you might be challenged that she has bruises on her back. Those are not bruises. Those are typical pigmentation of children from certain backgrounds. Children from Korea have these blue bruises. They look like bruises. They're just colors, pigmentation of the skin. So it's really true. And she really did have them. It's very interesting. And, often it'll be, you've been hitting that poor child. And that's really, a misunderstanding of what these colors actually are. And one of these aliens told this experiencer, "We made you, we put you here, but you have to live it. And they watch us grow. They've been here since at least the time of the dinosaurs. And according to this report, the aliens collected one of each species of dinosaur and placed them either on one big planetary zoo or on different planets. And that was at least 68 million years or more ago." Kind of like an alien Noah's Ark. There was the hybridization, allegedly, of primates with ETs, and that created humanity, and she was told this is true. This is Zecharia Sitchin's books, right? That dinosaurs were going to be wiped out by an asteroid. They knew this was inevitable because they saw it coming. So they took one of each species on Earth, and to save the DNA, and they've experimented with Earth life forms ever since. Buddhism is very closely related to ET philosophy, is what she was told. This blew my mind. If you go back and study the ancient Tibetan scrolls written in the earliest Sanskrit, that early writing is alien writing. They're real stuff. He says, this informer says, "I was on a team once that traveled to the Bhutan region to make sure the alien scrolls were safe. The scrolls the aliens wrote on are indestructible, but the paper the monks wrote on is very fragile and falling apart. The monks know there's a difference, and some of the scrolls just never wear out." And asked why they would come there in the first place, he said, "I don't know the whole story, but I've been told they came from Zeta Reticuli 1 and 2, a binary star system about 38 light years from the Earth." This is great information, and I read a lot about this stuff, and I don't remember reading this specific information anywhere else. Betty Hill later confirmed our sun is at one end of a trade route, and there are two stars of Zeta Reticuli at the other end of the trade route. The ETs who lived from the Roswell crash gave information to the military on the solar system, and our moon often has been used as an alien base to explore the Earth. There are massive ET relay stations on Saturn and the moon Titan. Mars did once support life, she was told, allegedly. Early in the 20th century, part of a UFO accidentally ejected in central Siberia. This is a very famous story. There was this massive explosion in Siberia, but it was really in the middle of nowhere. And she was told it's actually a nuclear explosion. It was related to a megaton thermonuclear blast. It leveled pine trees for miles. And it's true, the Tunguska fireball happened at 7:40 a.m., June 30th, 1908. 500,000 acres were destroyed by the equivalent of 1,000 Hiroshima bombs, exploding 4 miles above the Earth, and it was seen 5,000 miles away. Nothing grew there for decades. In 1996, Discovery magazine studied particles found there of an extraterrestrial nature, like the metals were not of this earth. And she was told that ETs make and live underground in bases. And don't worry about us creating earthquakes. We know more than you do, was the message. So this is the end of this set of notes. Give me a second. I didn't realize I was going to be so efficient. Let me go get the other notes. Okay. Let's see here. Sorry to keep you waiting. I'm trying to figure out the best way to do this. Okay. So, some of these alien sightings are biological androids, she's been told, and some of them are actually like robots. The Foo Fighters were robots. They're a certain kind of what they call EB, extra biological entity. Type 2, the taller grays, are robots. So she's told that we've recovered ET bodies, we've recovered some UFOs, and they gave us some UFOs to study. That was kind of a mind blower. So everything they do here is known by and okayed by government. They're not here to harm or kill people. They do experiment and mutilate animals for the purposes of experimentation, to muddy the waters. The government did some of that too, so that people would blame the government, but there was an ET purpose, and they did most of it. They're highly concerned with our environment. They're very much against above ground nuclear testing. And they did stage protests at one nuclear test. They flew by and landed on the ground, and the government knows this. The UFOs supervise and have been seen shooting into the sky to stop these tests. She was explained that time cycles are in spirals similar to events repeating themselves. You know, so history kind of does repeat itself. And they know what's coming up, and they're because of the spiral repetition, and they want to change impending catastrophes. They're trying to influence us because we won't want our future if we don't change our future by changing our behavior. They're trying to convince us off of a destructive path. They can't stop it because it's our free will, but they're trying to influence our free will. They feel responsibility. They made us. This is complicated. It was a mistake. So they feel very responsible to redirect us the right way of living and to not contaminate the whole universe. But there are also, they say, ETs with bad intent experimenting here. Allegedly, I'm simply imparting a story that was told. She was told the praying mantis type that's sometimes seen is probably an android. It's been seen at Bentwaters as well as other experiences. There's a video from Bentwaters, apparently, and the mantis has an aura around it. And you could see that, and you could see the UFO. You could see the ramp. The ramp into the UFO was transparent. There are pictographs, like hieroglyphics on this craft that look like pictographs in caves or hieroglyphics in Egypt. You can see Colonel Williams standing right beside the ET in this video. And she's told that this incident at Bentwaters, it wasn't a crash. They parked their UFO, and the Air Force was helping them. ETs can manipulate the timeline. There are 5 to 6 foot tall blondes who are slender and human looking. They have an invisible double eyelid. There are another kind of gray, not the short ones and the sort of short ones, but now there's another kind that cause problems, lie to people. They and the good ETs have both created Nordic androids that are very human looking. There's a thing called the Red Book, which is a human collection of information on ETs. This is all bits of information she's given, and she's just presenting it. Greys and other EBs, the extra biological entities, look the same, but some of them will have different uniforms and insignia. They are telepathic. Some of the Greys are more reckless. They have little or no compassion. It's probably why they get along so well with the government. Allegedly. In the training manual for Majestic 12, extraterrestrial biological entities are broken down into 2 groups, EB1 and EB2. The EB2 are the smaller ones, and the question is this an android or an independent gray group? And there's speculation. And what's the relationship? They were enemies at one time, and they're supposed to live without war today, but the EB1s and 2s have no control over the Greys. So there's just subtleties of difference in what they look like, and it's really not terribly important, but it was kind of interesting, I thought. There's not necessarily cooperation between different kinds of ETs. The humanoid blondes and the Ebens, the 1s and 2s, had a war 6,000 years ago. They all make androids, some of them to look in their own likeness. They can work on the insect type, the androids, Men in Black and others. Their brain cells can work on us in remote control. And she asked about Bigfoot and was told that this particular person didn't know. And I'm not going to belabor these descriptions. I mean, we've seen descriptions of the varying kinds. Some are so tall, some have so many fingers, but they look sort of similar. Then there's the ones with the big noses and the capes with the high collars. And, you know, you should read the book. So she's told, again, that there are a limited number of souls. They have to be recycled. Souls are interconnected. And then I wrote in the margin here, Dolores Cannon, Volume 5, Convoluted Universe. Not all bodies have souls, she's told. And she asks the question, therefore, are souls coin of the realm? In other words, are souls what everybody's really after here? And it explains some souls have many lives in regressions. And these aliens worry that we could damage our souls if we damage our bodies. I thought that was interesting. Now, this guy who's been telling her all this stuff says that every time a soul lives through life, it picks up the residue of the life, memories of the past life. So, karma, of the 7 deadly sins, carrying it into the new life. She's told there is a supreme being and there is an evil force. And, it's like this opposite balance thing. And, she was told that the Ebens, the extra biological whatevers, are scared of this evil force. And I wrote, uh-oh. So everything that happens today has happened before. It's a big cycle. It just repeats. And interestingly enough, the president is not read into this. He's not on a need to know. And it predicts when she wrote this was the early to mid 90s, and it was predicted in 97 there would be a meeting between the ETs and the MJ-12. They are watching their children grow. They got us started, and they feel responsible for us. So she asks, why does the Vatican encourage a high birth rate by forbidding contraception when there aren't enough souls to go along? And it's definitely a question that we'll ask the cards. So when this informant asked the MJ-12 guy why ETs made us and put us here, he said, quote, "You don't want to know that." We'll have to ask the cards. So a 1997 study called Cell took Neanderthal DNA and studied it and said it's not linked to human DNA as originally thought. It was a German and a U.S. study, and there was no indication of mixing of Neanderthal and Cro-Magnon DNA. That our last common ancestor was Homo erectus 600,000 years ago. So what primate led to Cro-Magnon and Homo sapiens sapiens? So I'm not advocating any of this being fact or non-fact. I'm just telling you what the book is saying. I don't know. Are we worker created without us consciously being aware of it? That's certainly what Zecharia Sitchin said in his books about Sumeria. Could we be an experiment? And is survival linked to spiritual growth? These are the questions that Howe is asking in the book. Are these time travelers on a mission to avoid extinction in the human future? And Carl Jung became convinced of some of this stuff before he died. So let's look at what he had to say about it. He said, now he got in touch with Donald Kehoe, Major Donald Kehoe, in the late 50s, who wrote Flying Saucers, They Are Real, Flying Saucers, A Modern Myth. Jung got in touch with him. He said if it's true that the Air Force or the government withholds telling facts, then one can only say that this is the most unpsychological and stupid policy one could invent. Nothing helps rumors and panics more than ignorance. It's self-evident that the public ought to be told the truth, because ultimately it will nevertheless come to the daylight. There can hardly be any greater shock than the H-bomb, and yet anybody knows about it without fainting. That was kind of a clever point. Okay, let's see here. How are we doing here? I think I'm going to stop here. This is the beginning of a new chapter. And I really hate to interrupt the flow of a narrative. So I'm going to stop video number 4 and we'll get on to the next videos next week. Trying not to overwhelm everybody. And if you want to follow up on this, I'd recommend reading Jacques Vallée. You can look into Major Kehoe's books, Keyhoe. They seem a little dated now, but, they were some of the very first books that came out publicly and talked about this. And Carl Jung, might be interesting to look up what he had to say, too. So that's it for today. And I appreciate you watching. I hope you're enjoying this. There's plenty of food for thought here. And I'm keeping a list of questions to ask when we do card readings on the book. And in the meantime, thank you very much for watching. Slán go fóill. Sláinte.